gave a series of disastrous interviews where one minute she's saying there's a housing crisis, the next minute she's telling what's his name, Trevor Phillips on Sky, that there's plenty of housing. I mean, which one is it?
How many children do we allow to be killed in this country before we get some balls and say, call me any names you want? Because calling me a name isn't as important as saving that child's life. But do you remember Gordon Brown standing up and going, British jobs for British people? And so many years later, when they analysed who took all the jobs, over half of them went to migrants. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. Preston Journalist is back again, returning guest. Cheers, Ash, for coming along.
Hi, Nick. Great to be back. Cheers.
Let's jump into this. We always start with our favourite politician. What's Starmer been up to? What's going on with Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, as usual, of course, he's been out the country first of all. He jetted off to the UAE and Saudi Arabia and came back empty-handed, something which people may forget, actually. Starmer criticised Boris Johnson for going to Saudi and saying that he's going cap in hand to dangerous dictators, but it's okay for Starmer to do it, apparently. But he's also been pushing, and I think this is a very bad line of campaigning personally, but they're pushing very, very hard on what they call the housing crisis they inherited from the Conservative Party. And that's been the agenda this week. Try and talk about anything but serious issues. We're going to talk about housing instead. And Angela Rayner, as you may have seen, I'm sure many people saw on the BBC and Sky, gave a series of disastrous interviews where one minute she's saying there's a housing crisis, the next minute she's telling what's his name, Trevor Phillips on Sky, that there's plenty of housing. I mean, which one is it? And then we find out that in Rachel Reeves' own figures, there's going to be a population increase of 2.5 million more migrants coming over here purposely by Labour, might I add. That's in the figures. And that means that about 5 in 7 of all the new houses built are going to go to people coming over here, not British people that actually need them.
I saw those interviews she did on Sunday, just gone, and it was astounding how bad they were. Now, I can understand, politicians get thrown out there and they don't know what questions are going to come to them. Things can happen and, they're not prepared for it. But housing is under her portfolio. She is in charge of housing in the UK. How she could not answer that question, because he said to her, you've just said there's a housing crisis and you're going to build 1.5 million homes, which is great. And then when I ask you about immigration, you say there's plenty of houses for them. It can't be, both those things can't exist at the same time. You can't have a housing crisis, which requires us to get rid of all the housing regulations and plough fields up and build houses and do it because it's national interest. And the next moment saying, there's plenty of houses. Which one is it, Angela? She actually embarrassed herself completely.
Firstly, who the hell is sending her out? As you just said, it's part of her brief, this, and she's only been given that brief, by the way, because there's no way in hell they're going to make the target. And Starmer's very happy to let her take all the crap because he doesn't like her. It's the worst kept secret in Westminster. Those two can't stand each other, so she gets all the shite, and he wants to make sure that she looks bad at the end of this parliamentary term, so she can't take over from him or have a run against him for the leadership. I think that's what's really going on here. But her advisors, her civil servants, whoever it may be, should be giving her the lines. Why does she not know what she's talking about? You can only come to the conclusion that she's just making it up as she goes along.
Absolutely.
It was so easy for Trevor Phillips to catch her out. It's not even like he was trying to, actually. It's a perfectly simple question, and she can't answer it.
The answer she should have given was this: we're going to build 1.5 million houses for British people. And then he says, well, you're importing another 2.5 million. And she said, yeah, that's correct. But the houses we're building are going to be prioritised for British people. Immigrants who come to this country who are welcome, and I love them and I want even more of them. But we're not going to build new houses for them. They're going to have to deal with the old stock. I'm talking about British people on council waiting lists, and they're the people I care about, and that's why I'm building these houses. I'm not saying that would have been the right answer. I'm not saying that wasn't a load of rubbish, But that would have cut him short, and that would have been a better answer to her make believe that there is no housing crisis answer.
But then he would have turned around, as he did actually during the interview, and say, well, where are these people going to go? And they simply can't answer it, can they? They want to import these people and they've got no idea where they're going to house them. The truth is, and Labour don't want to admit it, that they're going to build these new homes, which they've already had to scale back their targets on, and they're going to say, right, illegal immigrants, well, maybe not even illegal, legal immigrants, wherever they are, you're going in this social housing and to hell with the British people. And that's what's going to happen here. And then the only houses that are going to be left are going to be houses that you can buy or possibly rent, but basic supply and demand, because there'll be less of them, they're then going to cost even more. So your average British taxpayer, whoever it may be, a young family trying to get on the property ladder for the first time or something, will have absolutely no hope in hell of being able to afford one of these houses. But of course, these people, either they do think this far ahead and they just don't care, or they don't think this far ahead because they haven't got the brain power to do so.
I'm not sure which one of them is the answer because both of them look valid to me. We've been in this position before with Labour. Do you remember Gordon Brown standing up and going, British jobs for British people? And so many years later, when they analysed who took all the jobs, over half of them went to migrants. And Labour are doing it now. We're going to build 1.5 million council houses and housing association houses, and we're going to give them all to people who are not British. And I don't know why they do it. And I don't know why the British public put up with it. And you're perfectly correct. If Labour import another 2.5 million people, that affects the housing market. If they're only going to build 1.5 million, let's say, which they're not going to do anyway, we've already found out there's not a chance in hell they can build anything like that. But even if they did, that's still 1 million houses too short for the people coming into the country, which means more demand, which means rents go up, house prices go up, more people living in poverty, more people spending more of their low wage on their rent, more people claiming benefits because working isn't good enough because my rent's so high, I might as well sign on. And this again just damages the economy, damages the country, but most of all, it damages the people, the British people, regardless of colour, race, or religion. If you were born here, you have a right to be called British, and you have a right for the government of this country to put you first. And our government never seems to put any of us first.
It doesn't. They don't care, do they? You know, Ben Habib said in an interview quite recently, I can't remember where it was now, but he said the problem with this government is they are fundamentally anti-British. They don't care about this country, they don't care about its culture, its history, they don't care about the people who live in it. All they're bothered about is looking good to the rest of the world. Otherwise, you'd never do stupid things like giving away the Chagos Islands or attempting to, which is now looks like it's going to be blocked. He said that this government happily, if they thought they could get away with it, would sell us down the river. They're trying to put our armed forces into the EU. They would take us back into the EU. They would take us into the Euro. They would do anything to try and distance themselves from actually being British and the British identity. And in that, I think he had a very, very good point. I am absolutely convinced that Starmer was going to try and skip another PNQs this week because he's just a complete disaster anyway. I mean, Kevin Badenoch's not much better, but he's a complete disaster. And every time people see him, we've said this before, people every time people see Starmer, sorry, they drop in the polls. He's a very dislikable person. He's extremely disliked. And he was going to stay in Saudi or the Middle East or something and keep out the way of PMQs. But things were going so badly at home with people like Rayner having to go out into the media and make asses of themselves that they've said to him, you better get back here because this is going absolutely tits up. And if you've got to call someone like Starmer back because things are going bad, then you are in trouble.
Exactly. You have to call back your poorly performing leader who has no charisma, who has no public affinity. The public have never taken to the man, which isn't necessarily his fault. That's just personality. But if you've got to call someone like that back to stick up for the government because everybody else on the front bench is actually worse than the worst prime minister we've probably ever had, then you know you're in trouble. You couldn't make This is worse than an episode of Yes, Prime Minister.
It is, isn't it? I mean, if it wasn't so tragic for the country, it would be seriously funny. But he's just so bad. Rayner doesn't know what she's doing. You get Lee. I've spoke about lots of these ministers in the past. I mean, you've got Annalise Dodds. I mean, good God, the woman was Chancellor for a while, didn't know what she was doing. You got Rachel Reeves, who's taking us into recession. You got Angela Rayner, who's quite frankly is an embarrassment to working class people. You've got Starmer, who'd like to be working class, but he's a multi-millionaire. I can't think of one decent person. Wes Streeting is one of the favourites, believe it or not, in the cabinet, and people tout him as a future Labour leader. And he's far too smug and has got far too much to say for himself. And he is also very, in my opinion, a very contemptible individual. I can't think of one member of this cabinet who I would say, if well, when Starmer's out, if not if, um, I want to take over from him. I can't think of one.
Well, I can tell you who it won't be. It won't be West Streeting. I cannot see how the Labour government appoints another white man as leader who then becomes prime minister because I don't know how they get away with it. Because for a party that goes on about diversity and equity and all that woke rubbish, to appoint another white man, I don't think their backbenchers will have it. I don't think a big section of their voters and party members will have it, which means we will get someone a lot worse than Wes Streeting.
Yeah, you'll get another DI. Sorry, go on.
Exactly. So we'll end up with a DEI hire. It'll be someone like Angela Rayner. It'll be it'll be a black person. It'll be a Muslim person. Um, it'll be someone a lot worse than what we have now, and that's what Labour's going to bring upon themselves and bring upon the country.
And you know what? They'll lose. Why do people? Why have Rishi? What's Rishi? Indian, isn't he? Kemi Badenoch is of Nigerian descent, I think, and Margaret Thatcher, Liz Truss, Theresa May. Whatever you think of all these people, how have they got to where they were in the party? Apart from Theresa May, who really slimed her way into the job. I don't think she was ever really the favourite to become the leader, but they've got there on their own merits, whether you like them or not. The only way Labour, as you rightly said, who preach about DEI and diversity, can get any women into the party or any ethnic minorities into the party is by having all black people shortlists, all women shortlists. That's exactly, by the way, how Rachel Reeves managed to get into her seat because she was on an all women's shortlist, from what I understand. Not because she had brains, not because she was a fantastic speaker or led people to vote for her. She was on a shortlist that made sure she managed to get into Parliament. And at least the Tory party, God knows it's in the doldrums, but at least the women in there have the brains, the political knowledge, the nouns, the life experience to actually get some people to vote for them and get there on their own merits. And it's actually very, very patronising to women. I don't care what colour skin you are. It's very patronising to anybody to say, well, we have to get a diverse candidate now to be our next leader. So what we're going to do is put you on a shortlist with a lot of other black people, and we're going to make sure that one of you can be leader. How patronising is that? It's ridiculous.
We've seen where this goes. You remember a couple of weeks ago, there was a DEI hire, New Zealand Navy captain. Yes. And what did she do? She sank the ship. And that's what happens when you get DEI politicians. They sink the ship. Look what happened to Hamza Useless in the SNP when he was first minister. Look at the black guy who was running the Welsh Labour government. He lasted 2 months. When you take in a DEI hire, you might get some good headlines, but they all fail when they're tested. And an MP is tested several times a day.
Yeah, exactly. That woman, by the way, in New Zealand, she'd served in the Royal Navy first, I think since 1993 or something like that. She in total she'd been in both navies about best part of 30 years. And if she hadn't managed to progress in the Royal Navy, then there's a reason for that, isn't there? She was not fit to control that ship. But politics is a different game, I suppose. But, I mean, defence should be completely separate, but obviously in New Zealand it's not. But yeah, you look at Vaughan Geffin, and that was the guy from Wales, wasn't it? You look at people like that, and the guy didn't have a brain cell in his head anyway. You could see that during the the virus that went around a few years ago. He was in charge of health then. The guy didn't know the first thing about health. He was just talking absolute rubbish the whole time. And Humza Yousaf, it's well known that in Scotland he was put in the party, personally selected to join the party. Again, not because he was a great politician or anything. I can't remember what his job was now. It wasn't anything I think he worked in a call centre before he got into politics. But the SNP groomed him and they wanted somebody who looked diverse to go into the party. And you're absolutely right. He only got the job as First Minister, beaten by a far better candidate, a far more credible candidate in Kate Forbes, because they wanted an ethnic minority leader at the top of the party to make them look good. And it was a complete and utter calamity from start to finish. And that's what will happen with Labour. Whoever takes over, it doesn't really matter. They will be a calamity if they aren't allowed to get there on their own merit.
Do you remember the video of Hamza Useless when he came out of the NHS? He'd had something wrong with his leg, and they'd given him a specially adapted scooter that you push, and he was showing off to the press and fell on his face.
Yeah.
That's the level of this man, that he can't even use an NHS scooter to push himself along because he had his leg bandaged up or something like that. The man is an idiot. And we've seen the video of when he was going on about the milk in my fridge is white, the rice in my cupboard is white. And he came across as a nasty piece of work, anti-white, racist. And I actually think he is.
He is. He is absolutely a racist. If I stood up in Holyrood or Westminster and gave a speech like that about black people, I'd be run out of town. I'd probably get arrested for hate speech. But for some reason, it was okay for him to say those things. And you'd probably get away with it down here as well in Westminster if you wanted to, give an anti-white rant, anti-white speech. You'd easily get away with it. That's how pathetic our system has become when you live in a country that's about 86% white and you're allowed to be racist towards those people blatantly on camera like that. And is it any wonder the guy was never going to win a Scottish election? And you've got people out down here, by the way. You've got Dawn Butler in the Labour Party, complete out and out racist, and she doesn't even try to hide the fact. And what's even crazier is because she's in London and it's full of absolute turds, there will be white people who vote for her. That's the kind of people who live in London these days. It's absolutely mental place. I'm so glad that I thank God every day I was born and over now, I tell you.
Yeah, well, those sort of white people suffer from something called white guilt, which I've just wrote something about. I'm writing a new book at the moment, and I'm covering a lot of this stuff. And there's a section of white people, mainly women, left wing women, who look upon diversity and look upon the history of white people and feel shame and feel guilty. Why couldn't those African people have had the same start in life as me? I feel guilty. We need to help them. But what they're basically saying is these people are children and not as good as us, and we need to look after them and we need to damage ourselves so they can catch up. And it's the worst type of racism. It's the worst type of looking at a different group of people and feeling pity. I'd rather have someone be racist to me than feel pity for me. I mean, there's nothing worse than pity. Pity kills your soul.
Yeah, who are you? You were born black. I mean, what a ridiculous statement that is to make. Because you've got black skin, you're not capable of getting to where I've got to. You know, a wealthy, middle class, middle aged white woman. I've got to make sure that you're okay and stuff like that. And this is the whole culture. I know it's going off topic a little bit, this really, but this is the whole. This is half the problem. Like, you've got the majority of people. Knife crime in this country is committed by young white males under the age of 25. The most likely victims of knife crime in this country are young white males, black males under the age of 25. You know why? Because they're being told by people like Dawn Butler or being told by these wealthy middle class white women that they're victims from the second they leave the womb. So of course they're going to be brought up to think I've got no life chances, no prospects, I'm not going to get anywhere. So I'm going to turn to a life of crime, drugs, and God knows what else, and then probably die before I'm 30 because I've managed to get into this gang culture that's basically been bred into me from the second I was born.
Exactly. Just to correct one point, I think you made a slight mistake there. So when you say the offenders of knife crime, you mean they're black, majority are black men.
Yeah, or did I say white men? I got
You said
mistake. Yeah.
white. Yeah, I just want to make
Sorry. Yeah.
sure.
So
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be
no,
clear,
yeah.
the majority of knife crime in this country is committed by black youths under
Yeah.
the age of 25, and the most likely people to be victims of knife crime are also black youths under the age of 25.
And that's why we have this problem in the country, because to tackle that problem, you're going to be called a racist. And the police, the politicians are looking at this going, I could tackle this, but it'll ruin my career. Why should I put my career on the line to save the lives of young black men when I'm going to be called a racist? It's easier for me to let them die in pools of their own blood, and I'll have a better career. That's what this anti-racist nonsense does. It kills young black men. I don't care who, I don't care the colour of perpetrators, the colour of victims. We should be stopping violent crime. But we've created an atmosphere where most professionals will do nothing about it because of that accusation. And we've just seen it in the press last couple of days. The little girl who was killed by her dad, and they reckon the reason why social services and no one stepped in sooner was because they were scared of being called racist again. How many children do we allow to be killed in this country before we get some balls and say, call me any names you want? Because calling me a name isn't as important as saving that child's life. And that child's life comes before my reputation and my career. No one ever does that anymore.
Yeah, what was her name? Sarah, wasn't it? She's basically collateral damage, dying on the altar of wokery, isn't she? God forbid you should ever say something bad about somebody because of their skin color, but it's okay for them to smash a child around. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting and horrendous, the things that came out of that. Hearing that 999 call makes you want to punch that guy. Not fit to call himself a father anyway. But again, the authorities, you're right. Social services were told numerous times. Teachers were reporting her bruises and her injuries that she was coming to school with numerous times. The police were told. Neighbours were reporting it, and no one did a single thing about it. And there's no accountability though. Rest assured, none of these chief constables, none of these social workers, none of the people at the top will be held to account. They'll be able to carry on with their well-paid jobs, and you'll probably never even find out their names. The people who let down that poor child, and she won't be the only one. There'll be many more as well who have to face things like this, and it's just absolutely things like that with involving children sicken me, really do upset me.
There's a whole list of kids like that. 20 years ago, it was Victoria Climbier. So many years ago, it was Baby P. I think he was called Baby P. And the reason why, and he was a white kid. The reason why he didn't get stops from being murdered was because his mum and her partner were both lesbians. So they were every time they got confronted, they used the defense. People reported because we're lesbians. And because we're so scared of these words, not anymore, I'm not scared of any of them, but people who work for the council and police are so scared of them, they allow children to die. And we do it. Same with the grooming gangs. That's what that was about. It was about, oh, I don't want to upset the community. I don't want to be called a racist and Islamophobe. When are we going to learn these lessons? And the only day we'll learn these lessons is when we start sacking people for letting the children down. That will send a message throughout the whole country that if you fail, you lose your job. And then at that point, people will start losing their job. But at the moment, you can fail, the child can die. And as long as you tick the boxes, your job's safe. And it's not good enough. If I'd have become mayor this year when I stood against Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, what I was going to do was set up a panel to look at every grooming gang report in Greater Manchester. I wasn't going to commission a new one. What's the point? They all say the same bloody thing. So I was going to analyze every report in Greater Manchester and highlight senior police officers, and I was going to sack them, and they could take us to court and try to defend themselves in court. And I was going to highlight all the top social workers and council staff, and I can't sack them as mayor of Greater Manchester, but I was going to name and shame them to the press because that's the only way we change this.
I'm glad you mentioned Andy Burnham because I hope he watches your podcast sometimes. He might do because he might consider you some sort of rival in the future. I don't know. But he's a sniveling little coward when it comes to this. I've seen him at community meetings and people have started going mad about this grooming gang thing I'm not saying he helped cover it up, but he could have done a damn sight more along with the councils to find out what was going on with the police and why nobody was acting. And he runs away from these community meetings. He won't sit there and listen to people. He runs. And you know what? The people of Manchester were stupid enough to vote for him again in huge numbers. So next time this kind of thing happens, don't complain because you're voting the morons in that allow this stuff to happen. Or even if they find out about it, they certainly don't act on what they don't act appropriately and sack the people at the top like you just suggested. That baby P, I think it was Ed Balls at the time who was Home Secretary and I'm sure that he sacked the senior civil servant, the senior um, social worker in the country at the time. And this social worker was allowed to sue the government and actually got compensation back for getting sacked for not doing anything about Baby P. I mean, I stand to be corrected here, but I'm sure it was near enough £1 million compensation she got for that. And God knows I've got no time for red balls, but that is what we should be doing to these people. They're obviously not very good. And the public sector in this country is the easiest living you'll ever earn. Fail, you get promoted. It's that easy.
Yeah. And if we're talking about Greater Manchester and Burnham, Greater Manchester is that dangerous now that today, this morning at 10 to 9 in the morning, somebody was stabbed. Just near the school. So this isn't even connected now to nighttime economy and drugs and gangs. This is, you can be walking to school at 10 to 9 in the morning and you can be stabbed in Greater Manchester. We're not as bad as London yet, so let's not exaggerate where we are. But I tell you what, we're the second worst city and we're getting closer and closer to London every year. Andy Burnham has been mayor now for 8 years. He's never once spoken about knife crime. He's never once been on TV when there's been an incident saying, we're not having this. He's never once sat with the parents of someone who's been murdered in Greater Manchester with a knife and talked about what he's doing. He always passes knife crime over to one of his deputies because he does not want to be tarred with the failing policing of Greater Manchester.
But then it shouldn't be allowed, should it? What we should do then is if these people don't want to deal with the issues and they don't want to talk about it because it's not politically expedient, then it's quite simple. What we do is take policing away from idiots like Burnham and Khan and say, right, it's nothing to do with you. Do not dare run your next campaign on crime or law and order or anything like that because it's going to be depoliticized. The police are going to answer directly to say, I don't know, someone in central government, the Home Secretary or something, if that's what you have to do. But take it away from the mayors, then they can't campaign on it. This is what I do with the NHS as well, by the way, nationwide. I would say it's run by, if it has to be a set body of civil servants, then fine. But politicians are no longer allowed to campaign on things like the NHS. Because when it all goes wrong, which it does every single year, and it gets worse and worse, they then don't want to take the blame for it, but they want to campaign on it, especially Labour, who want to campaign. In fact, the Tories are just as bad. They want to campaign on how saintly and wonderful the NHS is and how we should all worship at the altar of the NHS. Well, I'll tell you what, when you don't want to take the blame and you've all screwed it up anyway, what we'll do is we'll just take it away from you, depoliticize it. It has a set budget every year determined by an independent body, and then an independent body can assess how well or badly it's doing. And politicians are not allowed to use it as a political football, which is what they do with crime, what they do with law and order, and with health.
Completely agree. So let's end this podcast on some good news in Greater Manchester. Andy Burnham has put our council tax up and he's painted the buses yellow. Success. So we're quite happy handling and taking and accepting knife crime in Greater Manchester because we have yellow buses now. He spent something like £500 million painting all our buses yellow. He was given the money off the government. That's his claim to fame. He's going to use that to run for Prime Minister about what he did in the bus with the buses in Greater Manchester. The whole thing's a sham. The whole thing is just a joke when we've got kids dying on our streets almost every day.
£500 million.
It was something like that. Yeah, it's like 500 million, I think he spent. Also, that might be more than just spending on painting on the buses. That's what you spend on taking the buses back into public running and all sorts of things. But he's wasted so much money and
God.
put the council tax up at the same time to help pay for it.
Oh well, I hope the people of Manchester are very pleased and proud of themselves for voting for such a fantastic man.
I cracked a joke when I was running for mayor that the reason why he painted the buses yellow in Greater Manchester is because he's going to turn some of the double deckers into ambulances. Because there's that many kids being stabbed on the streets, we need double decker ambulances now to go around and pick him up.
It's, it's tragic, isn't it? Honestly, these people absolutely useless and completely. At least we can hold people in Westminster to account. People like Khan and Burnham, they're not held to account at all. They can do what they want. Andy Burnham could go around, piss on your Christmas tree, and people would still vote for him. That's the sad reality, I'm afraid, of just being a Labour person in Manchester. You're probably going to win every single time.
Well, next election is in 3.5 years' time, so we will find out. Ash, cheers for coming along, and let's do this again soon.
Yeah. Cheers, Nick. Thank you.
Cheers.